friends. Thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick and I had about the US Grand Prix in Las Vegas. If you remember, Dick and I covered the Las Vegas Grand Prix during our November 2023 race review. You might also recall I said I'd like to discuss that specific race a bit more. Dick was happy to oblige. Since the 2024 season is upon us, we decided to release it now so it does not get lost in the shuffle. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Dick, I said this as we did our monthly review that covered Brazil, Las Vegas, and Abu Dhabi. I said in the middle of it, I wanted to talk more about Las Vegas because that's the one that had all my notes. And so thank you for indulging me a bit and doing an extended conversation on this. I think you stated during that conversation that you thought Las Vegas was a success. And I shared that I saw that there were positives there, but I remain a bit neutral to its long-term success and sustainability. And I stated that I wanted more data. So I'm coming to you now asking you to help me see what you're seeing. And so I'm going to walk through some questions, some of the headlines, I think, and then you give me your point of view. Sound good?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So the first thing I saw a lot in the lead up, a little bit in the post, but mostly in the lead up, was the impact of the race on the local Las Vegas residents. You have a unique thing because you were actually there a few weeks before the race, and I'm seeing things mostly from the social media, and I wondered what you saw, what you heard, or even just some things that if you gleaned, even that not necessarily because someone said anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So, funny story. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, and we were there doing some video work at another race, and one of the guys was like, "Man, I really want to get a close-up look at the sphere." And I was like, "Well, yeah, okay, we can do that. One of those things. We'll go figure out, where's a restaurant near the sphere, and there's plenty of restaurants in Las Vegas." And so I said, "Well, let's see what we can do," having no idea that the track actually goes right by the sphere, and which shows you how clueless I can be. So anyway, so we drive over, and all of a sudden I'm like, "Hey, wait a minute, we're on the Strip, and we're on the racetrack," and so I mean, literally at a stoplight, I got out and I looked at the pavement just to kind of get a feel for what the pavement looked like, and of course by that time most of the barriers were up and the fences and certainly the lighting system, which is it's an amazing, like, this aluminum trellis that holds all these lights. I mean, that whole piece just for the lighting was fascinating to look at. It was like a trellis or maybe like a miniature monorail system or something. I don't know. It was just crazy. Anyway, there's no doubt that the traffic on the Strip was bad, but it's always bad on the Strip. I mean, the stoplights are interminable. Maybe it was a little bit worse, but I tell you what, it wasn't so much on the track, but it was, a few blocks away from the track where they were doing additional road work to handle traffic and all that kind of stuff. Oh my goodness, that was awful, just awful. But all that being said, the Strip itself was still very, very busy. Lots of people on both sides walking up and down on the sidewalks. And of course, those sidewalks are huge, so they accommodate a tremendous number of people. And they had the traffic going both directions, even though, one side was fully paved and very nice, fresh pavement. And then the other side was, the pavement that's been there for however long, years. And, quite frankly, I think they needed to repave all of it. But be that as it may, it wasn't bad. Now, there are things like you couldn't see the Bellagio fountains because of the grandstands, and, stuff like that. So, it definitely put a crimp on the Vegas vibe to a certain degree because some of those landmarks you just couldn't see. And I think that there was a small increase in traffic along the Strip, but the traffic's always bad. But then, like I said, just off the strip, a few blocks. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Tough.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting because as I was listening to you, it made me think of, in my role, I've done a lot of work based out of DC and
Mm-hmm.
in the world of politics. And so I've watched the Capitol go through a lot of renovation, like the Capitol Dome itself.
Yep.
And you feel sorry for the people who just get to come once in their life or a couple of times, maybe as a kid, and then their picture isn't that picturesque.
Right.
So like what I'm kind of hearing you say for a tourist, it wasn't what would have been obviously because of the work, but it wasn't terrible as a tourist
Right.
to engage. And then for the Las Vegas residents, you may not be able to quite be able to decipher that because it wasn't really your reality
Right.
of knowing what that commute would have looked like a year ago. So I guess then what that leads me to is, does this kind of jive with what other venue street circuits, like I'm thinking like not so much Monaco or Singapore, but actually a Baku. Like, do you get the sense that this is kind of the norm, that first year hiccups and challenges to help a city see that this race is now coming there? Or do you think this was specific because it was Las Vegas and all the activity that happens? Like, I can't imagine Baku has the same type of nightlife that
Right.
Las Vegas does. Do you see my question kind of where I'm
Yeah.
trying to be fair?
Yeah. And it is a fair question. And I think, for most circuits, especially street circuits, but you still see it as well on permanent road courses, there's going to be glitches, and they've got to iron things out. And one of the things that I think is really, really interesting is that when they ran the Las Vegas race back in the early 1980s on a parking lot in the back of Caesar's Palace, it was a very, very contained circuit. They basically, it was a parking lot, so they just went and repaved the parking lot, put up the barriers and said, here you go. And what was interesting about that is that was, if not the first, it was one of the first races where they didn't actually run a race for another category to kind of break the circuit in and figure out where the issues were, so that when Formula One showed up, those issues have been addressed. That was usually a tradition, and that was part of the certification program that a circuit had to go through to host a Formula One race. But somewhere down the road, they kind of lost their way. And that's not been the case anymore. And it hasn't been that way for quite some time. But, like the loose manhole covers and stuff like that, that would have
Yeah.
been found.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, as we talked about in our earlier conversation, I was one of the odd Americans who sat up and watched everything, right? And
Right.
as that drain cover issue happened, I did wonder, like, how did this happen? And I did think about feeder series and could that happen?
Yep.
Should that have happened? And so that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you is, do you think that that's practical given it is Las Vegas, and is it advisable, especially since you're saying it's in the history of F1, but it's not the current way that you kind of do that? Do you think that they would maybe consider that moving forward?
Man, it's so hard because, when you have a street circuit, by its very definition, you're talking about shutting a street, a series of streets down for the local traffic, right? And so it becomes really, really difficult. Now, I would think that had they had a support race, like a Porsche Cup race or something like that, where you got big, heavy cars going pretty fast, if something like that had come up, they would have discovered that problem, right? But no, they didn't have any feeder races, and this is one of the things that honestly, I really feel like where the issue about, and we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but show versus the actual race, right?
Mhm.
If everybody's there for the show, well, then it's about the parties and the DJs and what restaurant are we going to go to and hanging out with your friends. And oh, by the way, there's a race. Whereas most races are actually, they have support events, right? And,
Mhm.
one of the things that was my big complaint about Circuit of the Americas when they first started hosting F1, they had vintage Formula One cars and really not much of anything else. And so there was a lot of dead time where there was nothing happening on a track. And no disrespect to the guys with the vintage Formula One cars. I'd love to have one myself, but I don't have that kind of money laying around. But those guys are not exactly driving those cars to the limit. And so really it's just a little bit of a parade of a bunch of cool old cars, which is nice for about 10 minutes. And then after that, it's sort of like, would somebody like step on the gas, one of those deals. And so you need to have, real races with real racing drivers who are just happen to be young talents that maybe nobody's heard of. But you get a chance to see some of the future stars of the sport. And Vegas didn't deliver that. And I do think that was a major fail.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I like the way that you highlighted that, because as you were talking, it made me think of, when you go to, for in our industries, we have different conferences, right? And the first time a conference happens, you usually figure out, oh, that wasn't good. And I feel like many times my feedback is, instead of just having a front of room conference where I just have to sit in one place, I like breakout sessions. I like being able to have some free time. But I know there are other people who come to conferences who want to do the networking, and they don't really care about the actual conference itself. And I try to find a balance between the two, because I think there's value to that. And it sounds like what you're saying is, it would be using this analogy of a conference. I like it when you bring young people from the industry or new up and coming inside the industry to have their own stuff that you can get to hear from them, see from them.
Yeah.
And that if we had had that here in Las Vegas, it would have really helped us as a community of enthusiasts to feel like we all had a part. And then when you bring up the coda part, it's nice for the people who have that ability to buy that car, but the rest of us are sitting there going, okay, we got a few hours. And it's like that special elite event that only those insiders get at a conference because they're the mega donors. You're going, well, great. What do I have to do? Just twiddle my thumbs waiting for the conference to start.
Exactly.
And so it's very interesting to me that you see the value of it as well, because I feel very strongly, and this going back to the conversation or the point about show versus sport, when I felt like Max was very eloquent in his post-qualifying press conference, when the question was posed to him, Carlos, and to Charles, and I liked what Charles and Carlos said too. But I think that Max hit it on the head, is that for the sustainability aspect of the sport, when there's so many things that people's attention can draw them to, we have to educate them, which is, I think, why we three felt the need, we wanted to start this podcast, that we wanted to hit a spot where we don't like go into too much drama. I hope people see that, but we also don't want to be super technical, but we want to make it relatable, because we hope that people who are enjoying the sport will feel more confidence to enjoy it, like feel more connected to it. And it just seems like Las Vegas is an amazing opportunity for that, if done right, like to find that balance. What do you think? Yes or no?
I 100% agree. Yeah. I mean, and the young people, they need to have the big stage to play on too. But think about the fans too. They need to understand that it's more than just Formula One. Formula One's not the only thing there. And so if we're going to educate the fans, like you're talking about, and help them to understand that, Max Verstappen didn't just one day decide to be a racing driver. He started driving when he was 5, or whatever, right? And Charles and Carlos and all those guys, they've got this history where they were little kids looking up to these, the Schumachers of the world, or in the case of Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso. and so, there's that emotion there, and that kind of, I don't know, just, those are my heroes. And now all of a sudden, you can be on the track with these guys, years down the road, if you're talented and persistent and you've got a work ethic and all those kinds of things. And people need to understand that, we've got AAA baseball, right? We've got the development league for the NBA. Well, why wouldn't you want to see that if you're looking at, if F1 is the pinnacle of motorsport, and it is, then you need to see the incubator of all the talent that's coming up for the young folks that are fighting for a seat.
Yeah. And especially for the American audiences, I think we've talked about this before. I can't remember if we've ever done it online, but there's so much knowledge gap, I think, in the American audience versus European and maybe even
Mm-hmm.
global, because
Mm-hmm.
it's really a new market. So all the more helping inspire that next generation and find that American driver who will be able to set their sights on, I want to be the next Max Verstappen,
Yep.
Lewis Hamilton, and Fernando Alonso. That would be, I think, I hope that as they look at the results of the Las Vegas, it's not simply the dollars or simply the social media clicks, but also how are we making this sustain for a true community of people.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the hope in me, but let me move on to another question. Well, actually kind of falls in line with this. Was in the lead up, throughout the lead up, I kept wondering, is this Grand Prix too big to fail? Because so much had been placed on this. What do you think?
Man, what a question.
I'm
That's, I
not
mean,
giving you easy ones today, right?
no, 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 no. These are all fastballs, man. There are no softballs being thrown at me today. You know, it's a great question. And really, I think at this stage, it's probably too early to tell. You had the debacle of free practice one and really the debacle of free practice two. I mean, think about free practice one. Alpine wound up in 8 minutes of practice with a destroyed tub, right?
Yeah.
Ferrari ended up with a destroyed tub and a destroyed power unit and a destroyed gearbox. So, and that was the sum total of the running from free practice one, and then the
Yeah.
fans got kicked out for free practice two. And so, it started off really, really bad. So you could argue that they had nowhere to go but up. And funnily enough, the race delivered a pretty good race. So I think the bigger question is that did all the people who came there and spent enormous sums of money to be not only buying tickets, but hotel rooms and all that kind of stuff, they made the effort to be there. Are they going to come again? Or is Vegas going to change how they do things? Because I've heard stories like, oh well, we're going to add more general admission tickets. We didn't have any this year. Well, where are they going to go? I didn't see anything that looked like something that would work for general admission. It's sort of like you're either in a grandstand or you're not at this track, the way it's built. And so I think there's some fundamental things that are going to have to be addressed here to make that thing a long-term viable success. I think this year, hey, you got the novelty. I think some people, most fans, I would hope, would give it a second chance. But, they kind of get it wrong next year. Man, I don't know. I think we'll see attendance start dropping off. I mean, it was interesting because there was an article about Circuit of the Americas. And, in 2022, they had the biggest audience ever. It was like, I don't know, it was over 400,000. Let's say over 3 days, it was 485,000 people. I don't know if that's exactly right, but let's call it that for argument's sake. And this year they drew 480,000. So attendance was down 5,000. And everybody was like, oh, the sky's falling. See, we told you Vegas would take away. It's 5,000 people. It's like, no, it was still a raging success. And it's been around now for, over a decade. And I think it's a fixture on the, on the calendar. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The ticket prices are reasonable. The getting in and out of the circuit's not so great, but once you get there, it certainly works just fine. You can move around the track. There's a lot of walking, but you can do it. Plenty of general admission places that, in my opinion, offer some of the best viewing areas that you can find. Yeah. And you've got support races and all that. They really have figured out how to do it well, but it was an iterative process. It took them, several years to get it right, but they've got the formula for their particular race. But Vegas, on the other hand, is saying, yeah, we're going to go for the wine and cheese set, the real upper crust, not the beer and barbecue guys. Well, so the head count at Vegas, if they stay with that model, is never going to be what you're seeing at Circuit of the Americas, but it may not matter because they're paying so much per ticket that it takes care of the delta between what Circuit of the America has in attendance versus Vegas, if that makes sense. So I think you got to give it time. I think you got
Yeah, it does. It does make sense to me. And if anything, I was trying to grab my notes really quick. because I was thinking that I wrote on there, I don't know if it really, because when you brought up the audience that they're trying to cater to, I definitely do think that the two tracks here that we were discussing, COTA versus Las Vegas, COTA's target audience seems to be very different. But if you are giving so much for a ticket, I wonder are you really there for the race, or are you really there to be seen? Like, and that's where I would see it more akin to Monaco,
Yep.
the place to be.
Yeah, it's the see and be seen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so
Miami's a
you
lot
may
like
feel
that.
you might, oh, you think so?
Oh
Miami's
yeah.
like that too?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Interesting. So that's where I would imagine the competition is feeling more unstable, probably between Miami versus COTA.
Right.
Then my next question would be kind of going in through the financial side of this. Do you think this was a financial boon for the city?
I think for the restaurants, the hotels, the souvenir shops, they had to have felt an uplift. Because a lot of people came. And so I would say, yeah, probably so. I think in terms of, room taxes that the city would collect, right? They had to have felt that uplift. Had to have. So I think, sales tax, all that kind of stuff that they got a piece of, I would think the city, as a municipality, certainly felt an uplift. And I think specific categories of merchants probably did very well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Well, and tying that back to my loaded question of too big to fail, I would even say that it seems like Liberty Media and Formula One, in choosing this and executing it this way of engaging a city track like this, it seems like it exemplifies very much their focus and ushering in essentially a new era of F1. It seems like to me, and that with their acquisition and their growth model, this was almost like a proof of concept, maybe, because
Yep.
it seems like it's so different than like the Bernie Ecclestone era, and
Totally.
right,
Totally different. Oh yeah.
right. And so whether or not we think it to agree or disagree with this, whether or not it's a financial boon, or the residents like, I think that it's still too early for us to tell. But what by them essentially, as you said, coming from the bottom because of the free practice, there was only up. It does give them the ability to figure out from here, is this sustainable? Is this ushering it in going to be viable elsewhere, or is this going to be the race that typifies what we are wanting to do? I don't know. I just feel like we're only 2 weeks out. We have so much that we're going to have to keep our eyes and ears on to figure out whether or not this is good for the sport. And then I guess my last question, well, no, I have two more questions. I'm looking at this and thinking I have so many questions I want to ask of you, because the history of the sport better than I do. So you can help me put this in context. That's really why I wanted, plus your personal opinion of saying this is a success. Do you think that the things that we discussed in the monthly race review, the timing of the specific events, the calendar, where this fell in the calendar, we said was less than ideal. How quickly do you think that they can change these elements? Tying this again, this is now under the era of Liberty Media and for Formula One. Do you think they'll see the need to adjust this? Do you think that it should be changed? I know we both said that we read stuff that they're thinking about this. I think I said it during the conversation before. I think this should probably be the culmination of the calendar, or maybe it's I didn't say it then, but I think it could be even the inauguration of our season versus kind of in the middle. It feels just odd after going to such a flashy thing. So again, loaded questions.
Oh yeah, loaded questions. So let me just, number one, I think in terms of the actual weekend schedule, the teams will demand that it changes. There were too many movers and shakers saying, yeah, good idea, but the teams are exhausted, and we're starting to be concerned about our ability to function. I mean, all you'd have to do is have somebody not tighten up a wheel nut correctly because they were too tired, or leave a socket and ratchet in the bottom of a footwell where it get in the middle of the brake pedals, anything like that, some small thing, and you're looking at a catastrophic accident. Can you imagine a wheel coming off a car at 200 miles an hour? I mean, it happens at Indianapolis every once in a while. And that wheel will get launched 50, 60 feet in the air, go over the fence and land in the spectator, sections, into the grandstands. And, fortunately, the last time that happened was at Indianapolis was about, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 years ago. And fortunately, the wheel came down and landed in a parking lot. But still, think about the energy that's getting released through those wheels. And if one came loose, I don't even want to think about it. So from a safety standpoint, and then what does that do to the image of the sport and all that kind of stuff? You can't have that kind of stuff. And so I think starting a race, kind of like they do at Abu Dhabi, where, local time, it's the sun is, coming close to setting and you race into the early evening, that works the best. And you're going to draw the bigger American television audience and all that kind of stuff. And, the folks in Europe can do what we do when they race in Japan or Singapore, which is put it on record it and watch it later,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they absolutely have to do it now. Changing it from a scheduling, the overall race schedule for, are we going to have 3 races back to back, or are we going to have, like we had this year with Brazil a week off and then immediately go to Vegas and Abu Dhabi? That part, I think it'll take some time to adjust the calendar. Abu Dhabi apparently has a deal in their race contract that says they'll be the last race of the season. So,
oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
they're going to, like you said the other day, though, they're going to have to up their game.
Big time. Yeah. And I never thought I'd say that because Abu Dhabi is pretty flashy, but now we've been to Vegas. So, yeah.
Wow.
But you make an interesting point. I don't know if Melbourne has the same deal in that, we're going to host the first race of the season. And so, March in Vegas is just as nice as November in Vegas. So, yeah, that could work.
Yeah.
Sure wouldn't want to do it in like August.
No. Well, and I guess when I even looked at the calendar, I know that this year they made greater efforts in the name of, what is it, environmental impact, to try to group things together. I just couldn't understand why all 3 of our US Grand Prix couldn't be in kind of put together. I understand because it is catering to different audiences, so I don't necessarily know that you would truly be cannibalizing, and they're so far apart. Like, that's the difference. Like, the length that it takes to get from Miami to Las Vegas is kind of the same to go across Europe, and they do that. They travel around and go to these different tracks. So I don't know. I just think I hope that they will figure this out, but as they're trying to figure out the actual what the weekend will look like, sooner rather than later, if this is truly bringing in a new era for Formula One versus unintentionally shooting yourself in the foot with the audience. Which leads me to 2 other things, which is, one, what did you think, this kind of goes really dive into the weeds for a second. What did you think of the post-race interview in front of the Bellagio? Did you like it? That whole little escapade up and down the strip?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was fine. I mean, I'm kind of like, after the race, I really want to hear what the guys have to say. And as a racer, I really don't care about the show. The glitz and glamour, I realize you got to have some of that because it is F1 and all that. But I was really more interested to hear what the drivers had to say.
Yeah, like even this many days out, I remember in the moment going, oh, this feels kind of like a letdown right now. I don't understand why. They seemed uncomfortable, and I thought to myself, they're probably super sweaty right now. Why do they want to squish back in the I mean, I know it's a Rolls Royce, but why do they want to squish together inside of that car even for a few seconds and then stand there? And it didn't seem obvious to me where the audience was. And I thought it just seemed so unnecessary and weird. And so I just was curious what your thoughts were on that. Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those things that just didn't work.
Yeah, I hope they do not. That goes back to conferences, the feedback form. Maybe
Yep.
that's what they need to do. Hey, do we need to do that again? No.
No.
Um, my last question then would be, is Max was making a lot of statements, before and after the race.
Hmm.
What did you think about those? And we did kind of point to it earlier when we talked about the press conference after qualifying. So that's part of it. But he was making
Yep.
comments before and after. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Max flat out said he likes to go to Vegas, but not to race. and
Mm-hmm.
and there's a little bit of history there too, because when Max was much younger, he won there's a massive kart race that's held in November in Las Vegas. It's called the Super Nationals. Very prestigious event. People from all over the world come in, and Max won in Vegas when he was like, I don't know, 14, 15 years old, as did Charles, as did George. All
Mm-hmm.
of them have raced in Vegas and won when they were kids. And
Hmm.
so, this ain't Max's first trip to Vegas by any stretch of the imagination. So he's
Mm-hmm.
well aware of what Vegas is like. Um, but I think what Max was really trying to drive at was the fact that here's a track that very much is like Qatar to a certain degree, but definitely like Saudi Arabia, Baku, where you've got these massively long straightaways and then a bunch of slow corners, heavy braking zones and all that. Not many corners where the cars are like just absolutely flat out on the limit in, sixth, seventh, or eighth gear. Now, the last corner on the track at Vegas was certainly a right quick corner. There's no question about that. But the rest of the track was, some pretty slow, fiddly kind of stuff that connected a bunch of long straightaways. And I think that's what he was really driving at more than anything else. That as a
Hmm.
racing driver, they did not get the opportunity to show the world what an F1 car could do. Because he went and said, hey, I like places like Spa and Silverstone and Monza, the classic
Mm-hmm.
tracks where you kind of gasp when, a car goes through Eau Rouge flat, I mean, it's impressive. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's really what he was driving at is that he likes to drive a car to the limit, So
I like that. I did not take that point away, but that makes a lot of sense to me of what you're saying of both the previous experience and understanding the role Las Vegas played in his driving career,
mhm.
and then what it does, like leaving something on the table where you could have really showcased the sport in such a amazing way. Because like as I listened to him, I thought, can we really fault him? I don't really think so. I think he's speaking for many of us within the community, many of
Yep.
us who believe that this era creates like expectations and pressures on the F1 circus, really, that
Yep.
like I've said, I'm questioning its sustainability. And it, as he said that, I actually thought of something Dave mentioned in the past, that he's watched the somewhat decline, I think he would say, of NASCAR. And
Yep.
I worry as a fan of F1 who wants to see this sport thrive that we may be going in that direction if we're not
Sure.
careful. Not that we can't and shouldn't change things, but we should just be mindful. And then as I listened to him, I kind of did like this air punch in the, with my fist. I said, because I was like high-fiving him, going, Max might be the best voiced since he's not really he doesn't have anything to worry about. And he's not really old school, but he is old school mindset.
Yep.
And I was really glad that he spoke up, and I wanted to applaud him for, but at the same time at the end of the race, I liked what he said by essentially towing the company line in the most public of moments for the sport. And in even in what he did at the radio at the end of the race and in front of the Bellagio, he didn't take that as a moment to take a jibe at the
Right.
sport.
Right.
And that's classy to me because that's kind of like an intra conversation. And we
Yes.
do have new fans. They need to enjoy these moments and not have to see the internal strife in display. And
Yep.
that enthusiastic fans had been watching and they're new and they knew where Max was on this issue. So I
Yep.
was I was actually very proud of him in that moment.
Yep. Yep. So one quick Mac story for you. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah, of
So,
course.
when they have this huge kart race, the Super Nationals, it's multiple classes, right? And you've got kids 6 and 7 years old, and then you've got all the way up to old guys like me, and they're all running different specifications and all that. Well, Max was driving the headline class, and again, he was like 15 years old. And my daughter had a classmate who just happened to be at the time one of the very top kart racers in the country. And this classmate won his particular class. He wasn't competing against Max, but he was competing in a class like 2 rungs below the one that Max won. So this young man, has the same trophy that Max has, basically. But he came home and he told my daughter, that guy Max Verstappen, you mark my words, will be in Formula One, and he will be a world champion, because that guy is from another planet. That's the beauty of that race. You can go there and see all these kids that are coming in from Europe, and you're sitting there and you're going, well, I don't know, but this guy may wind up in Formula One, and I can say I saw him when he was 14, 15 years old. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Are they still doing that race series?
Oh, yeah.
When is that?
This year it was like 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. It was like the week after the Vegas Grand Prix. Yeah.
See, that goes back to the whole feeder aspect. Like, that would just be so great if that had been simultaneously showcased.
Right. Yeah. No way would that work, just because the hotel accommodations and all that. I mean, they had to reschedule that race to be able to be out of the way of Vegas.
Oh, bummer. Oh, bummer.
Yeah.
Well, you have definitely helped me to move more towards the positive. Not that I wasn't positive, but just slightly more into the positive side by seeing it from your perspective. Thank you so much, Dick, for taking the time to help me process through this, and hopefully help our listeners as well. If they were on the fence like me, or maybe they were negative against it, or even if they were positive and feeling like they were in the minority, I hope that every group felt that they had something to gain from this conversation. Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, sabrina@2guys8girlandf1.com. On that note, we need your help. Follow the example of other listeners and send us your suggestion of topics you think the guys and I should cover. We also need your help to increase our community. We've been humbled by those of you who have found us and stayed. To continue growing in the crowded podcasting world as an indie podcast, we need you, our friends, to make sure you are following us and rating us on your favorite podcast apps, as well as listening and sharing episodes with other F1 fans. Help us connect with more people. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.